Hello and welcome back to Inside Update, a show, podcast, production of InsideInvestigator.org, where we produce journalism to root out corruption in Connecticut. Today, I am joined by Marc E. Fitch, our senior investigative reporter, who's going to talk about a few different things that he has written, two fun ones. The first is called Unsealed. It's about bidding irregularities in Haddam. And the second we are calling Kamala Cover-Up, which I'm just going to leave that there. I'm going to make you wait 10, 15 minutes until we get to that section of the show. Let's talk about Haddam, though. Marc, just jump in and we can go from there because this is fascinating to me.
Sure. I mean, this story actually came to us from a retired journalist. Eric Hesselberg reached out to us. He used to write for the Hartford Courant. He was the managing editor of the Shoreline newspaper group. The guy, he spent his entire career doing the work that we do. And so when he reached out, I was like, oh, this, I'm going to pay attention, obviously. And what we found was that Haddam had received what they call a Connecticut Community Challenges grant. It was these grants that the Department of Economic and Community Development was giving to municipalities so that they can liven up their downtowns, create some jobs, things like that. And Haddam had gotten a sizable $4.5 million grant to do something with their defunct elementary school called Haddam Elementary School. And what they ended up doing, however, is the way it turns out, it just seemed like they had a preferred developer that they wanted to work with in redoing this school. They wanted to turn it into affordable senior housing and then keep some property on the side for community use. And they ended up going with a company called RAC Realty, which is based out of Middletown, Connecticut. Here's the issue, though, is the town did a competitive bidding process. And in their request for proposals, they said, all your responses are due back by October 10th. Three companies submitted proposals. There was Elm Street, I believe it's Elm City Communities, Heritage Housing, which was based in Norwalk, and then RAC Realty, which was based in Middletown. The only difference is that RAC Realty submitted their proposal 7 days late. And that is a big problem in the world of competitive bidding. I mean, in competitive bidding, everything has to be in on time. They're all open publicly so that we all know that there's no collusion or corruption or favoritism and things like that. And, when you're talking about multi-million-dollar projects, these bidding practices are a big deal to the contractors who engage in them, and they should be a big deal to town officials. But what I found in researching Haddam's issues was it was not a big deal to those town officials at all.
So before we start talking about what exactly the town officials did, can you just clarify, it's important to recognize that this is state funded, right? Because there are different rules because it's state money. So Haddam, if this had just been a project that they were pulling all the money locally, they would have more flexibility. Am I understanding that correctly? But because they took state money, they're wrapped up in a whole different system that they need to follow.
That is my understanding after speaking with some contracting experts, is that if it was just a municipal project, it probably could have been done any way they wanted to. But once you bring in state funds, and we confirm this with the Department of Economic and Community Development, you have to follow the state bidding and procurement practices. And they did not.
Just straight up. Just did not happen. I don't mean to oversimplify, but I think, it's important to kind of cut to the heart of it, right? I mean, if it's not happening, this was something, so this was picked up by a local paper as well. And the quote from the local official that local paper run was, oh, this is old news. And, I think we both kind of raised our eyebrows at that for a number of reasons, but one of them is it hasn't been rectified.
Well,
Old
and that
news, or
was
it doesn't matter if it happened 10 years ago. Something went wrong and no one has taken the time to address it or explain it fully.
And that was First Selectman Bob McGarry. He said it was old news because it had been posted on Facebook by Eric Hesselberg a year ago. Well, that's fine. It may be old news for him. I mean, he was involved directly in this, mess up. So yeah, it's old news for him. But hey, you know what? It's new news for the rest of the world. And that's who we're talking to. We're talking to the rest of the state, letting them know, hey, this happened. And I think it's good validation for the people of Haddam to know what happened. Who knows how much they know. But anyway, yeah, and you know, it's interesting because when I submitted my questions to both Bob McGarry and the town planner, Bill Warner, asking like, "Hey, what happened here? You accepted a bid that was 7 days late." Their responses actually kind of made things worse, I have to say, because they essentially said that they sent they sent out two different requests for proposals. One was posted onto the state contracting portal, which went to like 4,000 different contractors and developers in the state. And a second request for proposals got sent to their two preferred developers, Rack Realty, and I believe it was Elm Street Communities. And apparently, the RFP that they sent to Rack Realty and the other company contained the wrong date. They said in that RFP it said October 17th, and everybody else saw October 10th. Well, I mean, it didn't stop Elm Tree from getting their proposal in on time. They were on time. Rack Realty, on the other hand, reached out to town planner Bill Warner the day before the due date saying, "Hey, what's the due date on this?" And he said, "It's tomorrow." And they're like, "Oh, well, we thought it was the 17th because that's what you sent to us." And 45 minutes later, Bill Warner emails back and says, "Oh, hey, no, you can still do it on the 17th."
Hmm.
Now, if you're going to make a change like that to an official request for proposals, you need to offer it to everybody, and you have to amend the RFP. They did, as far as I can tell, neither. They didn't. They certainly didn't amend the RFP or the RFQ because it's still sitting up there and it still says October 10th like 3 or 4 times in the first few pages. Secondly, Heritage Housing got no such notification that there was an extension of time. I talked to him. He said, no, we didn't get anything like that. And even Bill Warner, in his response to my questions, says, "Oh, I think I might have mentioned it in passing to Heritage, when they dropped off their proposal to town hall." I mean, you might have mentioned it. Okay, all right. So, just kind of off the cuff.
As they're
And
there to drop it off.
yeah, because as he's there to drop it off, and Bill Warner didn't notify Elm Tree until October 10th, the day it was due, and they had already sent it in.
Right.
And another really interesting aspect to this is all these proposals were supposed to be sent in sealed. It's important so that all your hard copies and an electronic thumb drive of your plans are sealed, and all these sealed copies get opened at the same time in a normal bidding process. That doesn't appear to have happened. The proposal submitted by Elm Tree Communities is stamped as having been received on October 10th, which means somebody opened the envelope. And when I asked Bill Warner about this, the town planner, he says he doesn't think that any of the documents, any of the proposals were sealed,
Hmm.
which is odd. And he said that some of the proposals were just emailed to him. This is not keeping in with the requirements of bidding, especially, on state taxpayers are footing $4.5 million for this project, and it's being treated very nonchalantly, almost casually. And when I talked to the head of Heritage Housing, he's like, "I sent in my proposal sealed. So there is a lot of questions here. And it's not the only time that these kind of issues have come up. We were able to get a hold of emails regarding Bill Warner apparently just dropping one contractor and switching to another. And it raised enough of an issue that the old contractor reached out to the Department of Economic and Community Development saying, "Hey, listen, we were the lowest responsible bidder on this project, and we've already been working on this project,
Yes.
and all of a sudden we're getting dropped, and we thought you should know about this." The whole thing's very odd, and what's going on in Haddam is very odd. It's definitely not adhering to what we consider competitive bidding practices that ensure that taxpayers are getting A, the best deal for their dollar, and B, that everything is done fairly. I've seen this before. I saw it with Dillon Stadium, the soccer stadium in Hartford. They set up a sham RFQ process. They can deny it all they want, but it's quite easy to see because they had one preferred developer that they wanted to go with. Okay, but they had a responsibility to do a bidding process, and so they just set it up so that none of the other bidders stood a chance. And I think this is the same thing that happened in this situation.
Well, so let's talk briefly about competitive bidding, like as a situation. I think you listed a few of the reasons why it exists, and as we are an organization that works to root out corruption, I think we are also wise to give a thumbs up or accolades or kudos when uh, systems exist to prevent corruption from insider deals, handshake agreements, inappropriate use of taxpayers' money. There's a reason that these processes exist. So when they're broken, it does strike me as what'd you say? A little too nonchalant of an approach,
It's too
especially when they're
casual.
called out on the carpet by a journalist who takes the time to do their homework and understand the situation deeply.
Yeah, the process of what happened in Haddam is far too casual. That's not how you go about handling multi-million dollar projects. What's kind of interesting is Rack Realty that won this won this bidding round. Um, you know, I spoke with them. They did not want to go on the record with anything, so there's nothing much I can say as far as like their perspective.
Yeah.
But you know, I'd also sit there and say it's not really their problem. This is the town's problem. This is the town officials' problem. But Rack Realty had attempted to buy that property in 2019. And so this is a little background. They had tried to buy the property in 2019 to build apartment housing. The town didn't like that. They actually voted to purchase the property themselves. And now, lo and behold, a few years later, Rack Realty is going to have some of the property. They're not getting all of it, but essentially what they have is a 99-year lease on the property, which they can then renew after 99 years for $1. And they got this, yeah, they got this for a whopping $350,000. And you know, half the money to build this, senior housing complex is coming from the state, and they obviously have to put in their half. Um, but in a way, I mean, maybe they didn't get the property, which was valued at, in the millions, but in a way, they kind of got what they wanted. And a lot has been made about the fact that Rack Realty, based in Middletown, well, Bill Warner was the town planner for Middletown for, I think, 25 years. So there are, and I hesitate to bring this up sometimes because we're in a small state, and it's smaller still when you're talking about these kind of rarefied positions. But it's safe to say that Bill Warner and the guys from Rack Realty have met at some point. That they did work in Middletown. They have a lot of buildings there. One of the family was on the zoning board, and Bill Warner was a ex officio member. I mean, it's there. It doesn't really mean a lot, but it certainly can foster some concerns among the people of the town, being like, "Hey, what is going on here?"
Right. Well, it's why the structure exists to have those checks and balances because it is, yes, a small state. You want people who do really good work. It doesn't matter if there's just three of them. You want those three to still be held to the standard where corrupt actions are. You wrote about this in Double Down as well, which is an investigation into, some of the financial and investment practices in Connecticut for those of you who have not read it. But, your point in there was, yes, there were some kind of really terrible investments made. And yes, there were a lot of close friendships and, alleged handshake deals. But at the same time, there's only so many people who are doing this work. And there is, so just because there is a friendship doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong. But when these processes are followed, it makes it a heck of a lot less likely that corruption will occur. And then all of a sudden you got to, because if it doesn't, you got a great journalist knocking on your doors, wondering what that.
And that's the thing. This could have been so easily avoided.
Yeah.
All you had to do is just rebid the project.
Right.
Like that could have easily been done. Just all right, just rebid it. Not a big deal, and just have everybody do have the same date and everything like that. But when you when you don't do that, when you don't try to correct your mistake, when you do things in the wrong way, it does lead to those accusations of favoritism and underhanded deals, whatever. You're gonna get that, and these bidding practices exist so that you don't have to worry about that. And yeah, they could have saved themselves probably a bit of trouble and a lot of nasty Facebook posts if they had addressed the situation early on in a transparent way. And instead they chose to kind of dodge the questions, and then when they couldn't dodge it anymore, basically tried to make Eric Hesselberg sound like a nut, some kind of Facebook conspiracy theorist, when in fact no, he's a seasoned working journalist. And I have to say, it was a pleasure speaking with him and getting to know him and the work that he's done in the past, and that he continues to do. I saw even today he is on Facebook continuing his reporting about the Haddam Elementary School situation. So he is still out doing it, even though he's retired.
I think we're gonna have to pick up that thread another episode about the nature of local journalism and how it's changed. Heck, even in the last 2.5 years since we've been around, I feel like the landscape is shifting rapidly, and that's cool to hear. That's what you want, is people locally keeping a sharp eye on things. It certainly makes our life easier as journalists, on a statewide level, but it's just good to see because that's, I think, what we want to inspire, what we want to, come alongside people locally to root out corruption. We're not here to just say, oh, only inside investigators allowed to have great headlines. If we can bring that to others, newsrooms, individuals, wherever it is, this is a partnership between us and the state, and each and every person here. So, do you want to talk about Bloomfield?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about.
All right. So we're recording this on October 31st, which means next Tuesday is a presidential election, in case you haven't heard. So this will come out on November 1st, this episode, and throughout the weekend. And Marc, can you just talk about, there are rules about what is allowed to happen at a polling station, influences, what even you're allowed to wear when you go to vote. Bloomfield's in a whole different category here. Could you bring us up to speed?
Yeah, this was a tip sent to us, and it included a picture. And I have to say, I was very intrigued because I was like, I don't know how this works. So in Bloomfield, there is a senior center, and at the senior center, there's a gymnasium, and on election day, that gymnasium turns into a polling place. Well, you know, back in 2021, the entire side of the gymnasium was painted with a mural. And it was to, I believe, celebrate Black achievement and excellence. It had, Barack Obama, it had Martin Luther King, and it had Kamala Harris. And I mean, it's this massive, like 80-foot mural that you can see from a couple blocks away. And somebody sent it to us saying, hey, does this violate the election laws? Because in Connecticut, you have to be 70 feet away from a polling location in order to be advertising or trying to influence someone's vote. So, does this massive mural of Kamala Harris when she's running for president count as interfering or trying to influence? And so I was like, that's a great question. It really is. So I drove out there. I popped my head into the senior center, asked some of the ladies working there. I was like, hey, do you guys still do voting here? And they're like, yeah. I said, has anybody made an issue out of the giant Kamala Harris mural? And like they kind of got this look on their face, so like, oh, wow, I guess we didn't think of that. I'm like, yeah, I don't think anybody did. So I called up the State Elections and Enforcement Commission. I said, "Hey, what's the deal here?" And they basically said, like, "Well, until someone files a complaint, we're not going to make a determination whether or not this violates any election rules." And so I called up the town of Bloomfield, got a hold of their town manager. That's who everybody told me to talk to. Very nice guy. I said, "Hey, what's the deal here?" And I think they kind of did a little bit of a scramble to figure out what to do. And what they came up with, and it's a little, I mean, I guess inartful, especially when dealing with a very nicely painted mural.
Beautiful.
They're
Yeah.
harping over the whole thing on election day.
Wait, they're
So,
doing all of them. So not just Kamala, they're doing the whole 80 feet, or is it just going to be
well,
Kamala's face covered up?
I don't know. They said the mural would be covered up. So I don't know if they're just doing Kamala or if they're doing the whole thing. I mean, it'd have to be a real big tarp. Um, but I mean, everybody I talked to was like, "Hey, that's a really good question," And I know, especially post George Floyd, a lot of murals went up, celebrating Black achievement and Black excellence and things like that. What's kind of interesting or intriguing to me anyway is in 2021, I mean, it was almost a sure thing that in some way Kamala Harris would be involved in the 2024 election, right? I mean, either Joe Biden stayed in the race and she was running as VP. And I don't think anybody could have foreseen what did happen, but here we are. Uh, so I was it was one of the more interesting stories I think I've done just from a purely curiosity perspective.
Yeah.
Like, does this mural count as election advertising or, campaigning within 70 feet of a polling station when it's painted on the side of the polling station?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that your curiosity led to avoiding some, nasty allegations after the fact, or, all of, God only knows what could have happened if this question came up after the fact. So it's nice to have kind of, hey, this is, we put a blanket over it. This is dealt with at this point. I also think it's worth mentioning too, like, because on this show we so often talk about investigations, because that's kind of the product that I don't even want to say care the most about, but it's what we were formed around, is the ability to create these deep dive things. And I'm glad that we're talking about a news piece, because I think a lot of our news pieces fall into this category of the unique and wonderful and curious. And each of our reporters are encouraged. I don't really like assign stories in the way I think a lot of news editors do. I want you guys to write about what you find interesting, what's going on in Connecticut that is fascinating. And man, this one checks that box. But I think Brandon and Catherine and Alex have each had their own handful of really fascinating stories in the last month or two that is knocking it out of.
Yeah, that's the thing. When we formed this, it's like we want to find news that's not being reported. Interesting viewpoints. Just interesting things going on, and that doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to be a 5,000 word feature story. A lot of the stories that we do, we do daily stories every day, but a lot of them are investigatory. We're telling people things that they don't know, or compiling information that's new. Exploring these kind of weird, interesting questions that pop up. I mean, we'll chase down stories, maybe not always in this deep dive, feature story format. But I'm happy to do 1,000 words on something that is just different. I love it. So,
Yep.
and this was a great opportunity to do that. And you know, mural's not going anywhere. It'll be back. It'll be uncovered on Wednesday. Um, but yeah, and like I said in the story, I don't think anybody was in too much danger of being overly influenced. That district has voted 85 to 15 pro-Democrat every single election. So, but it was an interesting thought experiment at the very least.
It absolutely was. And good, just a good read as well. So that's fantastic. All right. Well, good. Marc, thank you for talking about both of these today. As I have said before, InsideInvestigator.org is a nonprofit. So we are doing this exclusively to root out corruption in Connecticut, and we are 100% supported through voluntary donations from our readers. So we would love to have you as part of that group. It's a really wonderful community of folks who believe in the power of investigative journalism to root out corruption. And man, just thank you to everyone who makes that possible. We will be back in 2 weeks to talk about new investigations. And until then, be well, stay safe, and stay informed.